Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 242, The Food Guide Policy Progress with Anna Pippus.
In today's episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk to Anna Pippus about the progress being made with the food guide and how it incorporates a more plant-based approach. Anna has been following along and even consulting on the changes happening right now in Canada with regard to the Canadian food guide and the guiding principles. She fills us in on how these changes are taking place, how it's different from other countries, and where the pushback is coming from. She helps clear up the cyber rumors and sets us straight, letting us know if there will be an elimination of the dairy food group. We spend some time talking about the connotation for adults and children when foods are called alternative and what food taxes are really for. We think you'll be pleasantly surprised with some of the advancements you hear in this episode, so share it with your friends near and wide.
Anna is an animal rights lawyer specializing in laws and policies that impact animals farmed for food. She holds 2 degrees, one in law from the University of Toronto and the other in psychology from the University of British Columbia. She serves as Director of Farmed Animal Advocacy for Animal Justice and Strategic Advisor for We Animals. Anna frequently speaks and writes about animal rights issues in mainstream media and legal publications, and at universities, bar associations, governmental committees and meetings, and community events. Anna's a mother of 2 and an enthusiastic plant-based cook. We want to thank everyone for their support with the Yummy Foods activity book for kids that we recently published and is now available on Amazon and Kindle. We know it's being used in homeschooling programs as community outreach materials, as well as a way to keep kids busy, learning, and having fun without electronics. We wanted to share a few testimonials. Happy customers have left. And this one's from Jessica.
I love learning about new foods. Still being a fairly new vegan family, I would love for them to learn even more. I was pleasantly surprised when we received the workbooks and every one of my children, ages 1, 3, 8, 10, 12, and 16 took interest. Wow. Well done, Shoshana and Adam. This book is interesting, fun, informative, and I feel good about the fact that my kids are not only wanting to play with it, but they are learning at the same time. Win-win.
This one's from Timothy.
The recipe activities are great. No stress. It's a way to bond with your kids in the kitchen and teach basic kitchen skills. I recommend it for homeschooling, church-based programs, and presentations to elementary school kids. The worksheets can also be used as fun activities to test basic food literacy knowledge in adult-based presentations.
To get yourself or a young one a copy, visit the link in our show notes, which is planttrainers.com/yummyfoods, or search Yummy Foods on your country's Amazon site. And now for a moment of gratitude.
Today I'm grateful for reconnection. I've reconnected with someone who I met at Health Fest last year when we were presenting down there, and I've reconnected with her over Facebook, and we had a beautiful conversation, and it's just so lovely that we have those opportunities in life.
Recently, I hit a 50-day mark. I've been doing some daily meditations, and it's been 50 days in a row that I've been doing it, and I find that it's been super helpful in helping me reframe my mindset for the day, and I'm just grateful that I'm continuing to do it.
Anna Pippus, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Traders Podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'd love to know if you have a moment of gratitude to share with us and our listeners.
Well, we're in a bit of a cold snap here in Vancouver. So what always happens when it's a bit cold is I'm so incredibly grateful for my home, for having a warm, cozy home. And, you know, other humans aren't so lucky and other animals aren't so lucky too. I'm always thinking about the farmed animals, of course, because of my job, and many of them are on very cold transport trucks and even freezing to death. So my mind and heart are always with, those sentient beings, whether they be human or non-human, who aren't as lucky as I am to have such a warm, cozy home.
It is nice that we can adjust our temperatures and have that kind of technology. And I always wondered what it would take for other species to be able to come up with the technology that we have. And I just don't see it happening, but we can provide that for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, when they're here because of us, I think we have an obligation to provide them with care.
So we first met at the Animal Justice Party here in Toronto, and it was a wonderful event to be at. We were providing butternut squash soup to everybody who was there, helping to show people who are vegetarian or omnivores that vegan food can be delicious, tasty, and, ready to go. And when we support the animals, we need to kind of look into what it is that we're doing in our own diets as well, because there are lots of animal rights activists who practice that on the outside, but don't always practice that when it comes to feeding their own bodies. So we're really happy to always provide healthy and nutritious options for everybody to help them make their way into the plant-based world a little bit more as well. Why don't you explain to our audience a little bit about animal justice and We Animals so that they get a sense of where you're coming from?
Sure. So Animal Justice and We Animals are both focused on the animal rights side of things. So what you're talking about, I completely agree with. I think showing love to our bodies is incredibly important as well. Our bodies are miracles and we need to feed them with good fuel. But that's not really so much what, and that's something that I think about a lot as a mother and that I do in more of my personal advocacy. But Animal Justice and We Animals are focused on the animal rights sides of things. So we're taking a hard look at how animals are being treated and trying to advocate for different treatment. So We Animals is an international photojournalism project that really focuses on documenting and exposing the ways that we treat animals. So in some cases, animals are really being hidden and we're not really we don't have a fair chance to have a conversation about what's going on. In other cases, what's going on is sort of in plain view, but we fail to see it because we've been conditioned to accept certain uses of animals. So We Animals aims to get us to really rethink our relationship with animals. And that's where Animal Justice comes in, which is the other organization that I'm involved with. And Animal Justice is a legal organization. So we focus on getting the legal changes that could be through laws and legislation or through courts and court processes, policies, that kind of thing, to be able to really make changes for how animals are treated. And the work that I do with farmed animals can sort of take one of two forms. So one is the direct, animal laws that really impact the animals themselves. So trying to improve the situation for animals or, ensure that the animal agriculture industry is playing fair when it comes to marketing, that kind of thing. And then the other sort of avenue is more focused on the food. So food policy, even though it really doesn't have anything directly to do with animals, the way that we eat, of course, has a huge impact on animals because some of us are eating animals, 3 meals a day and some of us aren't. And there's a lot of intersection when it comes to how we eat because it's not only the animals that are being impacted, it's our own health and it's the environment. So I'm also dealing with food policies a lot, which has one of the great, it has many great benefits for all of us.
So we want to get more into that food policy a little bit after, but what I wanted to know is, you showed a reel of all these different accomplishments that Animal Justice has made over the years. So what I wanted to know is in 2017, or maybe already in 2018, what are some of the progress that you've made that you're most proud of?
I think that the most exciting thing that has been happening lately is that we're starting to reach some real change and waking up in terms of our national food policies. So, and this was kind of a surprise because for many, many years, the food guide was dictated by industry interests. And now people are starting to wake up. And Health Canada recently has put a real focus on revising the food guide without the influence of industry, which is, leads them towards a more plant-based diet. And at the same time, even Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, so the National Agriculture Department, the federal government, they're also working on a national food policy, which, I've had a look at some of the preliminary documents, and although it leaves something to be desired, it's a massive change that they're even considering some of these sort of access to food and food justice and sustainability, some of these issues that, a decade ago really weren't even being talked about. So it's a very, very exciting time to be working in the food policy arena because we're finally starting to get some traction. And it can be very frustrating sometimes as an animal advocate to feel like you're sort of treading water and getting nowhere. But finally, I feel like we're really starting to get somewhere.
So is all this food policy change that you're talking about right now, is it in line with what's happening in the US? Are we ahead of that curve or are we following them? Because I look on the site and I see now the terminology's changed a bit and it's like Eat Well with Canada's food guide, or it's Eat Well Plate, or it seems like they're following the My Plate transformation that the US went through. I don't know which one's really gone first. Do you have any idea how that works?
Yeah, so the U.S. recently revised its food guide. Now, the way that these things work is it's not just sort of an overnight change. What happened in the U.S. is there was an advisory body that created a scientific report. And that the most recent scientific report, this was a few years ago before Canada's changes, the scientific report recommended a shift towards the plant-based diet and recommended a plant-based diet as one of sort of 3 healthy eating patterns. And it also acknowledged the environmental impacts of how we eat for the first time. Nothing like this had ever been done before in the U.S. And there was a huge amount of uproar that, of course, the animal agriculture industry was not happy because it would cut into their profits. And in the United States, the animal agriculture industry is very, very powerful. In the United States, I would say my assessment is that the political system is a little bit more corrupt than it is here, and it's a bit more polarized. So the industry was really able to have its way and to claw back a lot of the recommendations that were recommended by the scientific body's advisory report. Now, this report is over 100 pages long, very thoroughly footnoted, and anybody who wants to eat well would do well to look at that actual document and not the United States eating guidelines that really softened a lot of the language to make it less clear to people what they should do. So, instead of recommending eat less meat, eat less red meat, it will say things like eat more lean meat. So those little subtle changes in words can make a big difference for people because they're not sort of getting the message. People are not getting the message that we need to be eating, just from a health point of view, way more fruits and vegetables and way fewer animal foods. So that was not coming through. Health Canada is looking at the same research. The research, knows no borders, so the research is the same the world around. So Health Canada's body of literature, which included the U.S. scientific report, they're looking at the same thing, and they were issuing very similar recommendations. The only difference is just in how it's worded, because it's sort of complicated. Well, how do you take these complicated messages and boil them down into usable, followable nutrition guidelines for people respecting different literacy abilities, different cultural food traditions? So, it's a challenge, but the evidence is the same. And so what Health Canada has done very nicely, I think, is put forth some food principles. So instead of having a pyramid or a plate or something like that, they're trying to put forward these guiding principles. And this is following in the footsteps of something that Brazil did a few years ago, which was really celebrated by food policy experts. They did away with any of the sort of categorization, and they just went with guidance. So instead of saying, you're going to have 4 to 6 servings of X, which nobody knows what a serving is. Nobody's measuring out their food. Nobody has any idea what that means. They're just saying things like eat more plant-based foods. Well, everybody understands what that means. It's something that you can remember, and it's something that you can follow. So that's exactly what Health Canada has done. Instead of grouping it into something unusable, they're trying to do these eating guidelines. Now, these have not become the official policy yet. So they put forth the policy for a public consult, and that public consult included, everybody from all walks of life, everybody from nonprofits, and the agriculture industry itself. So they did have an opportunity to provide their feedback. It just wasn't with sort of special lobbying meetings held under the table. So they have yet to officially publish the final document, but that should be happening this year sometime. Really could happen any day now.
So what I see here is that some of the principles that they have is a variety of nutritious foods and beverages are the foundation of healthy eating. So we're like, what does that mean, right? But then you continue to read and it says regular intake of vegetables, fruit, whole grains, and protein-rich foods, asterisk, especially plant-based sources of protein, inclusion of foods that contain mostly unsaturated fat, And then where the asterisk continues is protein-rich foods include, and it starts off with those plant-based foods. So it says legumes such as beans, nuts, seeds, soy products, and then it goes on to name fish and eggs. So I really think that you're right, there might still be more to be desired, but I really do think that that's quite clear that just by putting those foods first, that Canada's making a really big stance and saying we support the research that we see and we're willing to take the risk against, big food corporate Canada and corporate America and really show people what it is that they're supposed to be eating, if and when people actually read these documents.
Yes, exactly. So I think that some of us can want more. I mean, we want them to say a whole food plant-based diet, but the reality is that this is a huge difference, and it's going to have a big impact if anything close to this goes through, which is why the animal agriculture industry is fighting so hard against it right now. And that's because right now what we have is a meat and alternatives category, and we have a dairy and alternatives category. That suggests, the language is very important. So that suggests that it's normal normal to eat meat and dairy. Or you can do the alternatives. An alternative is definitely a second best, inferior way to eat. And this really mirrors what a lot of people believe, especially older people believe that meat is a nutritionally superior product. And that if you want to eat poor people's food of lentils, it's sort of at your own health risk, but you're not going to be as robust and healthy and red-cheeked as the meat eaters are. That's really the sort of the stereotype and the idea, the notion that a lot of people hold. When you stop calling it meat and alternatives, but you instead say, prioritize plant-based sources of protein, for example, legumes and soy products, and then you start talking about fish and eggs, it really flips the table. So it's a huge change. And then in terms of you mentioned, to the extent that people read it, actually the food guide is hugely influential. It's one of the government's most popular downloads after tax forms, and it influences food policy at institutions like schools, hospitals, prisons. So it does have the potential to impact a huge number of people. It's what's being taught to children as well. So just as now we have sort of an older generation, if I'm trying to talk to my husband's grandmother, for example, she just thinks it's insane that we would have lentil soup and not a good, hearty, healthy meal of, steak or something like that. And that comes from education. These seeds are planted in youth, and the longer that we've believed these ideas, the harder they become to change. So it's once children start growing up with these ideas, it will suddenly become, common knowledge that plant-based foods are healthy foods.
And I actually think that it is one of the policies to continue with education. So education and educating the public is one of those policies that they are going to put forward. I just don't have it here in my notes. So does that sound right to you?
Yes, exactly. I mean, so there's definitely a focus on the food guide is starting to acknowledge to be less compartmentalized, and is starting to be more holistic in nature. So to recognize that food is not simply about eating certain, numbers of servings of certain items of food from different categories, but food involves culture and family and love and comfort, and it's wrapped up with all of these cultural and emotional traditions that we have. So there's a lot of recognition in the food guide of these things. So it says things like eat meals with loved ones kind of thing. Rather, the idea is like right now we've got a major food policy problem, which is that, or health policy problem, which is that people are sort of getting takeout and they're eating alone and wolfing food down and not really, they don't have a good relationship with how they eat. So the food guide is trying to change that and become much more holistic in nature. And that's exactly what Brazil did. And Brazil has seen huge success with it.
So it's been forever that I've been teaching to my grade 10 nutrition class the food guide. I've been forced to by the Ministry of Education. And when I walk in on that first day and I show them the document and I ask them if they've ever seen it before, they say, of course they've seen it because they've seen it at the younger ages. And so I say, okay, great. What are the food groups? And the first thing they say is meat, dairy, grains, and it's hard to pull out fruits and vegetables out of their mouths, but they eventually come up with it, and the alternatives don't even make it to the table. Like we don't even get to that. So I don't tell anybody. But I don't teach the food guide anymore because it's not a document that personally I believe in, and I don't think it's helping the students that I'm teaching.
Right. And the food guide isn't wrong. It's not bad. It's just that it's not as obvious as it clearly needs to be to undo some of the marketing and cultural values that we wrongly hold. So the food guide, if you look at it, yes, we do need to be eating the most servings of vegetables. And it does talk about, foods like tofu, and it does say to choose legumes often on the existing food guide now, but nobody sees that and nobody really remembers that. Just like you said, what are the food groups? Well, meat and dairy, that's what people know. So even though those little things are in there now, it's just not working. People aren't getting the message. So it does need to be overhauled so that the message that frankly is already there now becomes much more salient and clear.
Did I hear you say that they're going to be removing the food group labels?
Yes, exactly. So right now there are food groups, the meat and alternatives, dairy and alternatives, fruits and vegetables, and grain products. They're moving to get rid of that categorization format, recognizing that that's just simply not how people eat and it's not working. And instead they're just moving to eating principles. So it'll say things more like, choose water, drink water, eat a healthy variety of foods, including sources of protein, especially plant-based protein, or I'm paraphrasing, but
less processed foods, less sugary foods, less salty foods. Yeah.
And also choose unsaturated fats over saturated fats. So instead of saying, I can only have sort of 2 to 3 or 2 to 4, whatever it is, servings of meat meat alternatives. It's just saying, look, we know that unsaturated fats are better for you, so choose them. So it just makes it a lot more clear. But then within that, people should hopefully, the idea is that they would have, in addition to having clear guidance, they would also have a lot more flexibility to apply it to their own sort of cooking skill level, their own cultural traditions. So, wherever you're from in the world, you should be able to apply these eating patterns and be able to produce a dinner that feels familiar to you and your family. Right now, that's not the case. If you're from Asia, let's say if you're from China, where dairy is not part of the cuisine, and you're trying to eat from the milk and alternatives category, well, now you're an alternative. And just think about what that would sort of do to somebody, to suggest to somebody you're a second-class citizen, you're an alternative.
There's a lot of negative connotation that goes with it. And I think that my kids feel that at school as well, because as my daughter was taught, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, as my daughter was taught about the food groups, she got her report card home and she got a B- in health from two health professionals, and the daughter of two health professionals. And her B- was because she needed to choose healthier options when choosing from all of the food groups to create a meal. And when I asked her about what the project was, it was that she refused to put the pepperoni on the pizza and she refused to put the salami on the sandwich, but she did put some of cheese on the pizza because she just pretended it was Daya. So she was in grade 2, she was given a project to do with no alternatives, like be it negative connotation or not. She didn't even have the option of alternatives. She had to create the alternatives in her own mind. So for a 7-year-old to do that, I say kudos to her, and to be strong enough not to put that meat on and go for that A+, kudos to her as well. But I think that we need to make sure that the teachers are following suit as well, because, Adam's a teacher. I was a teacher for 15 years, and it's hard work being a teacher and coming up with new lesson plans that follow new curriculum every year. And if nobody's looking down their back, they might not even realize that they need to change some of their projects. So the way that Adam's saying he doesn't teach the food guide the way that it's meant to be taught, that he teaches it in a more broad way. So what happens to, I'm not worried about the millennial teachers, but the Generation X, Generation Y, the baby boomers who are still teaching, what happens when they're stuck in their ways and they just continue on the way that they are? We're not getting that grassroots. We're not getting those young ones to get the proper education. So I think it's really important that the government step up and make sure that the principals and other leaders in the school boards are making sure that these old activities that we're used to doing with our kids are absolutely changing, or it's going to take even longer to make change. We're taking a pause to let you know that this episode of the Plant Trainers podcast is sponsored by Health IQ. Health IQ uses science and data to secure low rates on life insurance for health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, triathletes, strength trainers, vegans, and more. We think Health IQ is crazy impressive and so innovative. We only tell you about products or services that fit into our values and that we could or would or do use ourselves. Despite the fact that we happen to be Canadian, we wanted to get the Health IQ experience so we could tell you more about it. Well, needless to say, we spent a Friday night taking their quizzes, and we recommend you do it too. Not only will you be able to save up to 33% on your life insurance by being fit, active, or being a compassionate eater, but you'll have a blast trying to beat the clock answering their skill testing questions. And the prize is peace of mind for you and your family and extra cash in your pocket because they offer exclusive rates, but you have to qualify through one of their Health IQ quizzes. So put it on your calendar now and head to healthiq.com/planttrainers and take their quiz to see if you qualify and get your free quote today. If you call them, mention the promo code PLANTTRAINERS when you talk to the Health IQ agent. And now back to the show.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge problem. When in the example that you gave of your daughter, salami and pepperoni, those are known carcinogens. There's not even any debate about that anymore. We know for a fact it's beyond debate now that these are carcinogenic foods. Bacon, sausages, these are carcinogens.
Yeah, it's not wild sockeye salmon.
Right.
Not
right.
In our book, it's not 100% better, but it's still better than the
W. It hasn't been classed as a class 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Exactly. And the International Agency on Research for Cancer. So, I mean, but I agree with what you're saying, and I do think it's important as well to not condemn the teachers, because clearly a teacher that is teaching this is just blatantly false information that the teacher is teaching. Teachers are busy. They shouldn't be expected to be experts in nutrition. We should have a health policy that supports them teaching the right information and good information. And so that's why it is important that, that's one reason why it's important that Health Canada is able to produce these easy to read, easy to understand, easy to teach documents so that teachers are equipped to be able to just simply teach the food guide. It shouldn't be on them to go and do all of this extracurricular education in the food guide in addition to all of the other subjects and topics and areas that they're trying to teach. I think it's really unfair to teachers, frankly, to be putting them in that position where they're going to be making these mistakes. And of course, it's really unfair to our children who are then being put in a situation like, my heart breaks for your daughter to be put in that kind of situation. How hard would that be for a 7-year-old to be sort of facing this decision between her ethics and her integrity, and then her need to sort of, and her desire to get a good grade on the other hand, and how frustrating that would be. That's the kind of thing that really stays with you.
So is there a plan that's going to come into place once this document's released? Is it just going to be posted online and everyone's going to expect to download it? Like, how do we follow through on the new information and let all these people know about it?
Yeah, well, any individual can sign up for notifications from Health Canada. That's what I do. But for a lot of people, it'll just sort of be a trickle-down thing. It's going to be just available for download on the Health Canada website. And believe it or not, a lot of people do actually go and seek it out and download it. And then I'm not sure what kind of system they have in place for disseminating it, but I suspect it's not a bad one at all because they do have a pretty active, marketing and public health dissemination program. I'm not sure sort of the ins and outs and the details of it, but I'm sure that on their end, they'll also be actively trying to make sure that this information is getting out there.
It's going to be a huge process to just re-educate everybody on all of this information. And it takes me to the whole marketing and advertising area. And I've noticed, even just watching TV, that more milk alternatives have been having commercials available on TV for people to see. And I'm wondering, I guess, if the ad campaigns, the marketing is going to start, we're going to start to see more of a shift, and how the meat and dairy farmers are really going to accept that and deal with that. Do you have any idea what they're going to be doing about all this? Because they can't be happy.
They got to start growing soy.
Well, yeah, and actually, that's part of it. It's a very live issue. So this is definitely something that's being discussed in trade publications, industry publications, at their conferences. There's dealing with basically as they see it, the threat of the plant-based movement and the vegan movement. Unfortunately, right now, as happy as we all should be with Health Canada, the health department, the agriculture department is currently investing money, sort of doubling down on the animal agriculture industry. They're right now commissioning research on trying to help the animal ag industry build public trust. So, that's just a bit of a subsidy there to them. They're sort of conducting their own market research for them. That's our tax dollars paying to conduct the market research for the ag industry, in case I didn't quite catch that. But so I think that the ag industry is trying to research how can we sort of win consumer trust. Trust is being eroded. But I think that the writing's on the wall. Trust is being eroded because it should be eroded. The way that animals are being treated and confined and deprived in modern animal agriculture systems it's wrong, and most people really intuitively understand that. And it's not simply a matter of better marketing, but it's really a matter of just ultimately changing practices. They cannot continue to do that and to maintain any kind of level of public trust. But I think what a lot of the more forward-thinking companies is doing is they're shifting. So some animal agriculture companies are trying to change their animal welfare policies. I'm not going to sort of catalog what they're doing because I think they're sort of at the margins. I think they're really only marginal changes that can even possibly be made in these enormous confinement systems. But it does go to show, though, that they recognize that they need to address animal welfare and make proactive changes if they're going to stay competitive in the future. That's what the more forward-thinking companies are doing. The other thing the more forward-thinking companies are doing is they're investing in the plant-based food companies. They're investing in alternative meats and cultured meats, in plant-based meats, in the cultured and plant-based dairy companies. So they're actually buying shares in these companies and they're helping to grow them. And I think that's really a good thing. That's exactly what we want. We want companies being agnostic as to what they're actually producing. So when a company is really sort of all in on farming animals, that's a lot more challenging than when a company has money coming from here, money coming from there, whatever. What's the difference to them? If it's plant-based, they're happy. So I think of it as a good thing when they're diversifying and they can shift more towards plant-based investments.
And I think that you see a lot of middle class and upper middle class, upper class people who really want to know that their animals are being better taken care of before it makes it to their plate. And people are willing to invest more money in their meals to get there. I start to see that more and more amongst my friends, amongst people in different communities. And what that tells me is that that's a lot of progress that's been made, because I know growing up, I loved lamb chops, and people would be like, but baby, they would, go off and tell me what was happening and be like, but that's why they're there, right? Like, that's why they're there. I like it. That's the end. And I've obviously gone a huge distance since then, but I've seen people take steps. And when I see somebody take a step, that means, okay, in a year from now, maybe they're not going to be buying red meat. In a year from then, maybe they're not going to be buying chicken anymore. And then, slowly they're getting to a place where it's just not, just seeing that small steps, seeing that small change in direction is really lets me see down the line of where people are willing to make that change to having completely vegan meals, at least a couple of times a week or all the time. And especially with the language that's coming out in the new policies, it kind of makes it okay to have a meal without meat on it because it's written there. So I do see it as a good thing.
Definitely. I think that you'd be hard pressed to find a person who thinks that harming animals is a good idea. And that's what farming animals is always causing them unnecessary suffering in this day and age. I mean, we're not talking about subsistence communities, but for most of us, farming animals is causing them unnecessary suffering. And for most of us, that goes against our values. We don't think we should be causing unnecessary suffering to animals. Animals are vulnerable. And you don't even need to be an animal lover to sort of intuitively understand, we should be kind to animals. It's a very basic, elementary principle. And yet people do come up with all of these, just like you said, like these sort of excuses and defenses and justifications. And that's more coming from a place of, I don't know how to make change. It's a mental barrier more than anything else. And I think as it becomes easier for people to picture, what is a plant-based meal anyway, and start to build up a repertoire and an imagination for what plant-based meals and eating can look like, we'll start to see the shift more and more. I think that food policy is a huge part of the animal rights movement, because showing people the problem is only part of it. We also need to show them the solution. And the solution is making accessible, nutritious, satisfying, simple plant-based meals that can, be enjoyed by everyone, whether it's families or singles or, seniors, children, everyone in between.
So, but then how do you deal with the person who is not interested in how the food got to their plate? They like the meat. They want to eat the meat. They don't care where it came from. I'm a meat guy. That's what I eat. Do we just forget about those kind of people, or is there a way that we could educate them or get them to turn their head and figure things out a little bit?
Educate their wives or their husbands.
Because there are a lot of people like that.
I think that nobody is a bad person. So I start from the proposition that fundamentally everybody deep down inside has goodness. Everybody has goodness in them. Now that goodness might be covered up through a few layers or very many layers of, scars and battle wounds and suffering. But deep down inside, everybody is a good person. And I think, people say that they don't care about animals. Some people do, that's true. But some people also don't even care about themselves, their own bodies. We live in a time when people are still smoking. We know it's harmful. It harms you in the long term. It harms you in the short term. People are drinking too much alcohol. People are not getting the exercise they need. People are eating unhealthy foods. And so people are not even always being very kind to their own selves. And I think that that's really a symptom of something bigger going on. So, it can be hard to convince somebody to care about the planet or about animals when they don't even care about themselves. But I think that we can't always trust what people say, because people don't know what's going on. None of us know what's really going on inside our own minds and our own motivations. Our minds are, masterful tricksters, and it's happened to all of us. We've all sort of believed something and then sort of had new information come to light. And then we've gone, I can't believe I didn't, think of that, or I can't believe I didn't know that. And, or I was wrong about that. That happens to all of us. And so I think that wherever somebody is if they're saying, well, I don't care, as long as I just get my meat on my plate, who knows what's really underneath those layers and what they're actually really saying. And I think the message stays the same. It's to show, a vibrant, accessible, delicious, nutritious diet that can make you feel great. And then when people feel good, there's a feedback loop, because when you feel good, you have more energy, you care more, you can wake up and really start to live a vibrant life where you're really, getting the most out of life. But if you're not eating well, life has been kind of a disappointment. Things aren't going great. You have no motivation at the end of the day to do anything other than order takeout and sit on the couch and watch TV before you have to drag yourself out of bed the next morning and do it all over again, then yeah, the message might not land right away, but I think it's the same thing. It's, just try some lentil soup for dinner. See how you feel.
You need touch points, just like in any business.
Totally.
You need to, yeah, and it's marketing, right? Like it might not be marketing for profit, but it's still marketing an idea. And talk about
marketing an idea, absolutely.
So talk about marketing for profit. Can you talk to us a little bit about the soda taxes in the U.S. and how and if that's affected soda, if you know about that, and are they going to be instilling any kind of meat tax or anything like that?
Yeah, so generally taxing unhealthy food is a bit of a next frontier in policy. So Denmark, for example, has a saturated fat tax. I think 20-something countries around the world tax sugar. And yeah, I think some areas in the United States have implemented a soda tax, although I don't know the specifics, but I have been following the broader trend. And now people are starting to talk about the idea of a meat tax and whether that's sort of the next thing. So tax policy really serves, more than one function. It's not just a cash grab, although it can be that. I mean, we do need money to pay for things like roads and schools. But tax policy can also be used to deter unwanted behavior or to encourage wanted behavior. So you can use a system of taxation, adding taxes and tax breaks, tax subsidies, to be able to influence behavior. So that's sort of the idea behind some of these food taxes, is to make it a little bit less convenient and affordable to do the wrong thing. And I think coupled with that, it's really important the idea of access to justice. We also need to make sure that it's affordable to do the right thing. So I don't think we should be taxing food out of reach for people if we're not also providing tax breaks for lower income people to make it affordable for them to have fresh fruits and vegetables.
I wish I could take my organic garage receipts and put them into my tax filing this year.
Exactly.
Wouldn't
that be amazing? And it makes sense from a tax point of view for more than one reason. I mean, there's the sort of the one reason that, we want to encourage people to eat more this way. So let's make it more affordable for them. But there's also just the idea that, tax is also a way of paying for externalized costs. So the meat industry, all this cheap meat that we're producing is making us sick, and we're paying for it in our healthcare system. Conversely, people who are eating fresh fruits and vegetables are less of a burden on the healthcare system. So they're spending money out of their own wallets to cost the rest of us less money. So it does make sense if you think about how a lot of these costs are really much more than just sort of our personal, Visa bill at the grocery store. It's a lot more complicated what goes into these costs. And at the same time, the agriculture industry is being subsidized in many ways. There's, supply management in Canada allows certain farmers, dairy farmers, chicken, turkey, and egg farmers to set the prices, which keeps prices high, which is a form of tax on the consumer. They're getting sort of direct gifts, money to, upgrade slaughterhouses and things like that, or like the example I gave earlier of conducting their market research polling. And they're also just getting tax breaks. So farmers get tax breaks on things like farm equipment. So we have to look at whether these are really industries that we want to continue to be spending tax dollars on without also sort of leveling the playing field a little bit.
So it kills people like us and, even a lot of our clients who are more, 80-20 in terms of being vegetarian, and like we're sick less. My kids went to the doctor for their last checkup and then their next checkup. And the only other time my son has been back is since he had the chicken pox, right? Mm-hmm. So all of this money for people who are going in with ear infections all the time, people who have colds all the time, people who are getting flu shots, especially here in Canada, which is a little bit different than the States. Our Medicare system or our OHIP system or whatever province you live in, you could go to the doctor 8 times a week. And it's going to be paid for. So I'm paying a premium for my organic food. I'm probably paying less because I'm not buying meat, but we're eating lentils and rice. So I'm pretty sure our food bill's a little bit less than it would have been. But, the organic part does bump it up. But because we're not eating those foods, we're healthier.
Right,
and,
exactly.
Emergency Medicare is one thing. Like you get hit by a car, you break an arm, you break a leg. But when it's lifestyle-induced illness that people are using the doctors for all the time, that's our tax dollars. And you're saying our tax dollars are going towards slaughterhouses, our tax dollars are going towards Medicare, our tax dollars are going towards all these other things. And I'd like to put it towards, education and making sure that teachers are up to date and have proper materials to teach the changes that come up in policies, whether it be nutrition or whether it be mathematics. It doesn't matter. There's other places where I'd like to put my dollars, but I don't have so much of a choice. There are some small choices that we can make on our tax bills, but at the end of the day, we're paying for everybody else's health care when we're not using it ourselves. So it's tricky.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it is to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. And I don't want to sort of suggest that vegans never get sick, because of course we do. But certainly, I mean, we know for a fact that at the population level, that people who eat more fruits and vegetables and less animal foods avoid lifestyle diseases. On average, it's not going to be a guarantee in any individual case. But certainly, I mean, this is the type of thing that, let's say I were a life insurance company, I'd be asking, how many fruits and vegetables do you eat every day? Because it's really highly relevant, as relevant as do you smoke, and other kinds of lifestyle questions like that. So certainly, a lot of people will sort of balk at the idea of a meat tax. Like, you can't take a staple like meat and put a tax on it. That's sort of some people's initial reaction. But I say, well, think about it. I mean, we're already providing subsidies to the meat industry. It's costing us tens of billions of dollars every year in sort of indirect externalized costs. So why not level the playing field? Why not make it easier for people to choose the healthy plant-based fruits and vegetables and limit the amount of animal-based foods that they're consuming?
And if people really do want to eat their animal foods, then let their tax dollars go towards that industry, not mine, right?
Right. Yeah.
You just mentioned smoking, and before you mentioned deterring people, and it just put that image of those cigarette cartons with the photographs of like mouth cancer and throat cancer on the package. And I was like, well, all these class 1 carcinogen meats should now have those pictures on those products when people go buy them as well. Have they not thought of something like that?
In my head, I'm saying fat chance, but I probably shouldn't say that out loud.
No, not at all. In fact, Chile has recently done exactly that. They've required front of package labeling that includes like warning symbols about what's contained in the food for unhealthy foods to make it really clear when a food is something that should be avoided. And similarly, Health Canada is talking about putting a similar type of warning label on saturated fat. So that would include things like cheese that, I mean, I'm a parent, you guys are parents. We know that we live in this cultural fiction where cheese is a health food. Kids are eating saturated fat and salt packets. And, and parents are like, oh, good, my kid's eating a healthy food. No, this is not a good way. I mean, certainly you can get less unhealthful cheeses out there, but this should not be considered on par with something like broccoli. And yet it is. And so I do think it's important to have labeling that really reflects what's actually going on with food products. Because right now, you can label something fairly unhealthful as being, good for heart health or something like that. There's a real mismatch with what's permitted marketing wise and what's actually, contained in the nutritional value of the food.
So I just had that conversation with somebody at lunch where she was asking about oils and aren't they good for you? And I was giving the example of how if you're eating lard as your main fat and then you switch to coconut oil, yes, that might reduce your cholesterol. But if I were to start eating coconut oil, the amount that they're saying that you there's an air quotation saying that you should eat it, then my cholesterol would go up, right? Because you've got to look at the research and you've got to actually look and understand what's going on. But Adam and I just voted the other day online in Canada here about they want to put labels on foods and they wanted to know what people would want to see on foods, and if it's high in sugar, high in fat, and high in salt, that there would be a warning label on it. So we actually voted on what the look of that label would look like.
Right. Yeah. Health Canada has been doing some public research in that way. And I think it's really important. I mean, they're doing really incredible, groundbreaking things that are, they're not the first to do it. It is being done globally, but it's nice that in this area, at least, Canada is sort of at the front of the pack rather than being a laggard the way that we are with some of the animal welfare laws.
So what I wanted to do is I wanted to draw people's attention again, if they skip the intro, that you're actually taking part in some of this leeway that Canada's been making. Can you explain what you've been doing to help this come along?
Well, really, I've just been, participating in the public comment process, just like everyone else is allowed to do. But I've also been sort of mobilizing people to take action. So I've been reviewing the documents and then breaking down what's going on and giving people suggestions for what to comment on and what to add. Because sometimes these public consult periods can be a little overwhelming. They can be long and unwieldy and hard to read. So sometimes people need a little bit of a guide to be able to navigate through it. So that's basically my role, has just been sort of helping mobilize people on it and then providing my own sort of on behalf of animal justice, my own more detailed comments on it. So I'll submit, a full report with proper footnotes and citations on the various consults. So there's actually a lot happening right now. It's not just the food guide. There's also the various labeling initiatives, and also then the national food policy. So there's a lot going on in the food policy arena at the federal government right now. So that's really it, is providing these reports to the government and then mobilizing people. So if people want to sort of stay in touch with that, they can sign up for the animal justice mailing list or get in touch some other way.
So if people wanted to support the government in making things a little healthier, becoming more plant-based in the guidelines, is there something that they could specifically do other than sign up for that mailing list? Can they go to the government website and do something?
So I would say that the two sort of federal departments to stay abreast of would be Health Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I say Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada because right now they're coordinating the national food policy. I think that they've completed the public consult period of that, but still it would be a good idea to just sort of sign up for notifications on that, just to follow along in case there's another opportunity to provide feedback. I do think it's important for people to participate in those processes, because on the other side of it, there is the animal agriculture industry and their paid lobbyists all over it. I mean, they're having barbecues together. They're sort of going to each other's weddings. And it's really important that the public doesn't just, look the other way when it comes to these kinds of things. So being there, being vocal, saying we're paying attention, I know what's happening, holds them a little bit more accountable. And then in terms of Health Canada, they're doing a great job. It's really, it's more just a matter of sort of encouraging them to continue to go in the right direction. But same thing there, I would go and sign up for any of the initiatives that you're interested in. And then you can, then you'll get the email notification when some other thing comes up.
So we wanted to thank you so much for your time today, not just spending with us, but also the time that you've been putting in to make a change for animals, a change for Canada and the food guide and everything that's involved in that. So we just wanted to thank you so much on behalf of us and our listeners. We're very, very honored to have you on today. And we will definitely link to Animal Justice in the show notes. For anybody who wants to sign up for that newsletter, is there anywhere else that you'd like people to go on the internet to find out more about you or any of the causes that you're part of?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, if people want to just get in touch, I do have sort of a bit of an online web presence at annapippus.info. There you can find more information about what I'm up to. And then the other thing I do, my sort of hobby project, is my Instagram account, where I post what my family is eating, because I really realized over the years that what's for dinner is the big question on everyone's minds. You can talk about ethics all day long or the environment all day long, but really people want to know, what can I feed my family? So my entire Instagram is devoted to that. It's easy, animal free. And I often just cook dinner in my stories. If you're familiar with how Instagram works, just click on the bio picture and it'll be a quick little snippet of how to make what I'm making for dinner. And I've heard from a lot of people that they'll make dinner and follow along with me. So that's great.
That's a lot of fun. Good. So I hope that everybody goes to find you in those places. Again, thank you so much. And we're going to link to all of that on the show notes at planttrainers.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you too.
Thanks so much, Anna.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or any other podcast listening platforms. We appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it ensures other people will find us too. Thanks to our patrons. To become a patron, visit www.patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference. Connect and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Plant Trainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at www.planttrainers.com for awesome plant-based recipes and a list of our services. Email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so we can answer them on our upcoming Facebook Lives. We hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day.